Hey guys, this video is going to be on object-oriented PHP. Alright, so if you do not know any PHP at all, I would suggest that you at least learn the very basics. At least things like variables, arrays, functions, loops, just the real fundamentals of PHP. Alright. If you don't know PHP but you have experience in another language, especially if it's an object-oriented language, then you should be all right. All right. What we're going to be doing is going to be pretty simple. So if you already know object-oriented PHP, then you probably don't want to continue because it's probably just stuff you already know. But feel free to watch and maybe use it as a refresher. Alright, so what I have is I already have my server set up. I'm using XAMPP or XAMPP, and I have my local host at local.dev, and then I just have an index.php file. So the first thing we're going to go over is classes. Okay, classes are basically the building block of object-oriented programming, at least in PHP. Alright, so to define a class, you just want to use the word class, and then whatever you want to call it. In this case, I'm going to call it customer. Alright, and I haven't already planned out this code, just to let you know. I'm just kind of freestyling it. Alright, so we may have a couple errors or whatever, but it'll be fine. Alright, so we have a class called customer, and then in a class you have two core components. That's properties and methods. Properties are basically just attributes of the class. Alright, so we have a customer class, so we may have something like an ID, let's say a name, email, ID, name, email, and let's say location. Okay, now when we're using PHP 5 or newer, which most likely you are, you want to use what's called an access modifier. All right, also sometimes called an access identifier. And there's three different ones you can use. Okay, there's public, which means that, and I'm going to go over this more in depth in a little bit, but public just means that you can access this property from outside of this class. All right, we also have private. Okay, that's going to make it so you can't access this anywhere except this class. Okay, you can't access it outside of it. You can't access it from another class, even if it's extended from this one. All right, and then you have protected, which means that you can't access this from outside, but you can access it from another class that extends customer. All right, so for example, if we have, let's say, class my class extends customer. Okay, if we do that, then we'll be able to access email from in that class. Alright, so hopefully that makes sense. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set all these to public for now. Okay, and we'll get location. Alright, so now we have some properties for our customer class. Actually, you know what? Instead of location, let's use balance. Okay, since they're customers, they probably have some kind of balance. Now, we're just declaring these, but you can also set a default. Okay, if we wanted to say ID equals 1, we could certainly do that. Okay, and next thing is methods. Methods are functions, so try not to get confused with methods and functions. All a method is a function that's inside of a class. Alright, so you can also use access modifiers on that as well. So we'll say public function, and let's say get customer. Alright, now this most likely would take in an ID. Okay, so when you call this, you would put the customer ID in, and then most likely what you would do is you would take the ID that's passed in and you would assign it to the property ID. So to do that, what we would do is say this ID equals ID. Alright, so if you ever want to access a property in your class, you could use the keyword this, and then you want that and then ID, alright, or whatever the property is. Alright, that way you can access these from every method in your class. All right, because if we just keep it as ID and get customer, we can't access this from anywhere else. Now, a method like get customer, what it would probably do in a real application is it would go and fetch a customer from the database with that particular ID. All right, and then you would probably just return the customer. So we don't have the database part, but what we can do is just say return, and let's say it grabs a user called John Doe. All right, or a customer called John Doe. So now I'm going to show you how we can instantiate this class inside of our PHP. All right, so we want to make sure that we go outside of the class now. All right, now to instantiate it, you're going to create a variable. Let's say customer, and we want to set it to new and then the name of the class. So new customer. All right, and that gives us a new customer object or instance. All right, and then we can continue and we can actually access public properties and public methods or functions. All right, so for instance, let's say that we want ID to be 1 by default. Then we can go and we can echo customer ID, save it, reload, and we get 1. Now, just to demonstrate these, the visibility or the access modifiers here, let's make this private. Okay, and if we go and reload, we're going to get this cannot access private property. Okay, if I change it to protected, then it's saying cannot access protected property. All right, so let's make it back to public and get rid of that. Okay, now if we want to call a method, we can do the same thing. We're going to echo customer, and let's say get customer, and then we need to pass in an ID. All right, so if we go ahead and reload, we get John Doe because that's what we're returning here. All right, if we want to return the ID, we could do that. Okay, so let's pass in 11 and reload, and we get 11. All right, and then the same thing, if I set this to private, we get the error. Okay, same thing with protected. All right, so that takes care of properties and methods. Now, we also have a method called construct, okay, which is a constructor. And there's a lot of different programming languages that use constructors. What it is it's a special function that, or method, that is going to run when we instantiate the object. So when we run this, if we have a construct function, that's going to go ahead and run. All right, so let's create one. We'll say public function, and then you want to use double underscore and then construct. Okay, just like that. And just to test it out, we'll say echo, we'll say the constructor ran. All right, so now let's save, and all we're doing here is instantiating the customer object. Okay, and you can see the constructor ran. And we also have another one, and these are called magic methods. Okay, and there's a bunch of them. I'm going to go over some more in a little bit, but construct and destruct are magic methods. All right, so let's say public function destruct, and we'll do the same thing. We'll just echo. We'll say destruct. Destructor ran. All right, so if we reload, you can see we get the constructor ran and then the destructor ran. All right, and if we go ahead and spit out the customer again, let's actually just return the name. Okay, when we run this, it should go in between the construct and destruct functions. All right, so let's say customer get customer and just put in 10. Okay, now if we reload, oops, we got to echo it. Okay, so now you can see that John Doe is being printed out in between the two. Now, common practice would be if we're going to just get a customer here and we're going to pass in an attribute or property and then assign it like this, we can do that in the construct. All right, so it would take away the need to have this really. All right, so unless you're dealing with the database and all that, you would do it. But if we're just assigning class properties, then you want to do that in the construct. All right, so in here, let's say ID, name, email, and balance. Okay, and then let's copy that, and we'll just paste that here. Okay, so we get ID, then we'll do name. This will be email. And balance. All right, and I like to make these nice and neat. Okay, and then we can get rid of this altogether. Okay, and we don't need this destruct either. And we'll get rid of this. All right, so what we can do now is when we instantiate the customer, we want to actually pass in the values here. All right, so the ID, let's say 1, then the name, we'll say my name, and then an email, let's say brad@gmail, and then a balance, let's just say 0. Okay, so if we want to output any of these, we can now just say echo customer, and let's echo out the name. Okay, and that's going to give us the name. So now we have this customer that we can work with. If we wanted to create a function called, let's say, get email. All right, and then we can just return this email. All right, and then instead of doing this, well, let's get rid of that and say we want the email. And that gives us the email. And notice we don't have to pass anything in here. We don't have to pass in an ID or anything because we have our customer right here. It's an instance. It's just talking about this one customer. All right, so we can continue to run methods on that customer. Now, the reason that you would want to do this is because you could keep your properties all private, and then you could just have a method that gets that private property. Okay, so let's make all these private. And this is really common practice. Okay, so if we go ahead and save that and reload, we're not getting any error, and it's letting us get the email address because we're not accessing it directly. Okay, we're not saying customer email. Okay, if we do that, we're going to get that error. Okay, because what we're doing is we're using this method here to get the private property. All right, and this is public. I mean, if I set this to, let's say, protected and reload, we're going to get an error. Okay, so public methods, private properties is really good practice. So let's put that back. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about inheritance. Okay, so as I said, you can have a class extend another class. So what I'll do is let's comment this out for now, and we're going to create another class. So let's say class, and normally you would have these in their own files. Okay, you'd have a customer, for instance, a customer.php, and then whatever else you have for classes. In this case, let's call it this subscriber. Okay, so subscriber is going to extend customer. So we want to say extends. Okay, make sure it's plural. Extends customer. Okay, so now we have two classes. Now in subscriber, let's create its own property. Okay, so we'll say public, and let's say there's a property called plan. Okay, this is a subscriber and they're on a specific plan. Okay, and plan is not part of customer because not all customers are subscribers. Now, when we instantiate a subscriber, we want to do the same thing that we did with customer. We want to pass these in, all right, but we don't want to repeat having to put all these down here and these. So what we'll do is let's create our construct. I'm going to copy this one. All right, now we're going to have to pass in all this stuff: ID, name, email, balance, but we don't want to have to do this again. All right, so let's get rid of that, and what we can do here is we can specify that we want the parent construct to run. Okay, so to do that, we're going to say parent and then a double colon and then construct. Okay, just like that, and then we want to pass these in. Alright, now when we instantiate a subscriber, we also want to put in the plan. Alright, so we want to make sure we put that here, but we don't want to pass it to the parent because there is no plan up here. Okay, it's not a customer property, it's a subscriber property. So what we'll do is down here we'll say this plan is going to be equal to the plan that's passed in. Alright, and that'll take care of that. And now what we can do is let's take the get email and cut that out, and we'll paste it in here. Alright, so now we have subscriber get email, and we want to make sure that the email up here in the properties is set to protected. Okay, because that means we won't be able to access it from outside unless it's a class that extends customer. Okay, so now what we can do is copy that. Make sure you're outside of both classes, and this is going to be now subscriber is going to equal new subscriber, and now we can actually pass in the plan as well. Okay, so we'll say pro. Alright, and then we should be able to call get email. So subscriber, and we'll say get email. Actually, we need to echo it out. Alright, and now we can get our email, okay, through subscriber. Now, if we wanted the get email to actually stay in the customer class, we can do that because since subscriber extends customer, we have access to this. Alright, so we can actually save that, and that's going to do the same thing. Alright, now next thing I want to talk about is abstract classes, alright, and abstract methods. Now when you have an abstract class, it can't be instantiated, okay? So if we make customer abstract, we can't do this down here. We have to just use classes that extend it. Alright, so let's take a look at that. So we'll say abstract class customer. Alright, and just to show you what it does, let's comment this stuff out, and then we'll uncomment that and reload, and you get cannot instantiate abstract class customer. Okay, so let's comment that back out, and then let's uncomment this, and let's try to call get email. Alright, so that's going to work, but if we want to make, I just want to show you, if we take away the abstract in the class and add it here onto a method, and then we try, it's telling us that get email can't be run, and the reason for that is when you have an abstract method like this, it needs to be in an abstract class. Okay, so we need to put that back here. Okay, and then reload. Wait a minute here. Echo get subscriber email. Cannot contain body. Oh. That's because when we have our function here, we can't actually include a body. Alright, so what we'll have to do is copy that, and then this is, we're just going to declare it like that. Alright, and then down here is where we want to call it like that. Alright, So you just want to define your functions in the abstract class. Okay, it's basically, you can think of it as a base class that you don't use directly, but you extend classes from it. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. In my experience, I haven't really needed to use abstract classes, but it's good to know it's a fundamental part of object-oriented programming. All right, so this is starting to get a little cluttered, so I'm going to just get rid of all this. And what I want to move on to now is the static keyword. All right, so you can set static properties and methods. You don't define the class as static, but the properties and methods inside of it you can. All right, so let's create a class. Let's call it user. And let's say user has just a regular property of username, and also password. Okay, now the purpose of using static classes and properties is that you don't have to create an instance. You don't have to instantiate when you do that. All right, so let me just give you an example, and we're going to say public static, and let's say password length. Okay, and we're going to set that to a default of 5. All right, so password length would be a good thing to make static, because you don't need a certain instance. It's always going to be the same. The username and password are going to be different depending on the user, but password length is going to be the same no matter what. So that's a good example to use a static property. All right, and then we want to create, let's say, public static function, and we'll say get password length. All right, and what we want to do is return. Now when you're dealing with static properties, you don't want to use this. You don't want to do that. What you want to use is the keyword self, and then you want to use this double colon and then the property. Okay, so in this case it's going to be password length. Okay, so what we want to do now is let's go outside of the user class, and to call this, we don't need to say user equals new user or anything like that. What we can do is just the name of the class, and actually let's echo out user, and then same thing, you want to use this double colon and then the function, which is going to be get password length. Okay, just like that. Let's go ahead and reload, and it's giving us 5. All right, and you would probably have this private, but if it's public and you want to access it directly, you can do that as well. Okay, of course, if I said private, it's going to give us an error. All right, so that's how static properties and static methods work. All right, so that's going to be it for now. Those are the very basic fundamentals that you need to know when working with object-oriented PHP. All right, I will hopefully create a part 2 of this where we can actually create an application that's going to use these concepts. All right, so for now, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't like it, and I will see you next time.